rights as young people with disabilities, as well as a former UN SDG Young Leader. I will be your moderator today. So as someone who is very passionate about inclusive participation and the need to mainstream youth with disabilities in all youth movements, it is very gratifying for me to see the ECOSOC Youth Forum opening its doors to young people with disabilities and our allies, bringing us all together here to talk about our challenges, especially in the wake of COVID-19, but more importantly, discussing how we can all move together towards a more inclusive society for people with disabilities. So the ECOSOC Youth Forum is really a platform for youth representatives and leaders to engage with government representatives, youth delegates, policymakers, and other relevant stakeholders. And a key part of this is to ensure that no youth is left behind. And so it is particularly meaningful that we as youth with disabilities, often an overlooked and underrepresented community within mainstream youth circles, have this opportunity today to talk about and discuss these issues facing us. It was great to have similar conversations last year through a consultation with youth with disabilities and later as a side event at COSP in December. And I'm looking forward to hearing from even more youths today, both youth with disabilities from around the world about their experiences, but also from youth representatives without disabilities and how we can work with them to really mainstream this. I'm also excited to hear from UN agency representatives on their thoughts on how we can work with them to ensure that youth with disabilities are mainstreamed in all UN programs and activities. But before we do that, I'd like to first thank the Finnish mission for their work in this area and for being a pioneer and avant-garde in extending support to bringing the Youth with Disabilities agenda to the front and center. It's my honor to now invite His Excellency Jukka Sarovara, a permanent representative of Finland to the United Nations, to share his views with us. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much, and dear friends, dear colleagues, let me start by extending my warm thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to join and open this vital side event. November last year, the permanent mission of Finland, among others, supported the organization of the global consultation for youth with disabilities. This consultation and a subsequent high-level side event at the 13th Conference of State Parties to CRPD was historical and provided unique information about the situation and experiences of young persons with disabilities globally. It provided concrete recommendations and steps needed for ensuring youth with disabilities can participate in the global politics and decision-making. I am therefore pleased to witness the continuation of this crucial conversation here today. It is now a little over 1 year after the WHO declared the COVID-19 pandemic. Although it has been a tough year worldwide, the outbreak of the virus and the subsequent public health measures, namely social isolation, have had an extremely differing effect on people. It is now clear that the pandemic has gravely exacerbated existing inequalities and further marginalized those who were in the margins already before the pandemic. There is emerging data indicating that the COVID-19 response has been especially biased against persons with disabilities and may have a causal link to a range of human rights violations in all parts of the world. Additionally, the intersections of gender, age, and disability have aggravated discrimination against women and girls with disabilities, including youth with disabilities. Many of these intersecting forms of discrimination remain largely invisible and unaddressed in the large-scale COVID-19 responses and recovery efforts. Looking ahead, it is clear that building back better calls for transformative and systemic changes to the ways the global policies, services, communication, and information have been formulated and delivered thus far. Disability is a long-term priority for Finland's human policy and a cross-cutting objective of our developing policy. A human rights-based approach, gender equality, and the principle of nothing about us without us guide our disability inclusion work. We have recently started implementing an intersectional lens to our development policy and cooperation, a lens combining the intersection of gender, age, and disability. Although we are just taking the first steps, we think this is critical in responding to the diverse realities and multiple forms of discrimination, including ensuring sexual and reproductive health rights and services are available also for women and girls with disabilities. It is also critical that all development and humanitarian actors commit to collecting and using sex, age, and disability disaggregated data. I'm looking forward to the information shared today about the specific impacts of the COVID-19 and the lockdown measures on youth with disabilities. This session is a significant contribution to the growing body of knowledge and understanding of the socio-economic impacts of the COVID-19 to persons with disabilities globally. I sincerely thank you for this opportunity and look forward to an interesting discussion and concrete takeaways for building a more inclusive and just future for all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for those encouraging remarks and for being a strong supporter of this agenda and a strong ally with us. We look forward to continuing to work with you in the future as well. I would now like to invite the chair of IDA, Ms. Ana Lucia Erlago Barba. Thank you for IDA's partnership in organizing this event, for bringing us all together to talk about this very important topic. The floor is yours.
Muy buenos días. Un saludo latinoamericano desde Quito, Ecuador, América Latina.
A big greeting from Ecuador, from Latin America.
Un saludo fraterno desde la Alianza Internacional de Discapacidad.
Brotherly greetings from the National Alliance.
Red de redes, hoy por hoy, representando 1,100 organizaciones de personas con discapacidad.
That promote networks that represent all the people with disabilities across the world.
El mundo hoy se encuentra combatiendo una
The world
pandemia
now is fighting a pandemic
y sanitaria, y en el sur global
and sanitary, and in the global south,
el mayor impacto de esta crisis por COVID-19.
we have a very big impact of this pandemic on the global south.
Resaltando los retos que aún tenemos para no retroceder
a lot of challenges in order not to
una verdadera implementación de la Convención sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad.
So we have to implement all from the agenda of the people with disabilities.
Pero aquí estamos.
But we are here now and we are going forward.
Enfrentando todos esos retos
and fighting all of the things that we have to go further.
Hoy quiero resaltar que
now I want to put an accent
de visibilización y acción
visibility and action in our alliance is very important.
Son los grupos vulnerables de personas
con discapacidad subrepresentados. The most vulnerable groups.
Entre ellos, los jóvenes con discapacidad.
Of the young people with disabilities. They are key people.
Los dos pilares de la inclusión plena y efectiva de las
where we can find two pillars of the inclusion.
La educación inclusiva y la inclusión laboral.
The inclusive education and the inclusion of the work.
IDA considera de gran importancia el empoderamiento y el liderazgo de los jóvenes con
discapacidad,
actores claves que movilizan el cambio
key factors which mobilize the change in human race.
Desde el campo de la defensa y la abogacía por los derechos de las personas con discapacidad.
From the area of the people with disabilities.
fundamental su participación en la
We-
próxima cumbre global de discapacidad a desarrollarse en
we
Noruega en
want to
febrero de
develop
2022.
in February of 2022.
Quiero compartirles hoy
I want
que la
to
RIADI,
share with you
la Red Latinoamericana de Organizaciones No
the plan
Gubernamentales de Personas con
of
Discapacidad,
Latin American network of people with
como
disabilities
la Red de
as
Organizaciones
a
miembros
network
de
of
IDA en América
member
Latina y
organizations
Caribe,
and IDA in Latin America and the
ha
Caribbean,
dado un paso muy
which gave
importante para la
a very important
conformación
step for the
de la red de
confirmation
jóvenes.
of our network.
Luego, gracias al apoyo de
And then
UNFPA,
thank you for
se ofreció en
thank you to IDA
Latinoamérica el
for its
primer
presence
curso
in Latin
en línea
America,
con apoyo de la plataforma desarrollada por
their
la
support in the
plataforma de entrenamiento, de
platform of
capacitación,
training of
para
capacitation,
fortalecer aquellas capacidades de los jóvenes con discapacidad,
empowering the
con la
capacities
intención de
of
formar
youth
nuevos
with
líderes para el
disabilities
movimiento.
to create new leaders among youth with disabilities.
Tomando en cuenta la importancia de la
In mind
participación
the
y
importance
la voz de los jóvenes con discapacidad a nivel
and the
regional,
voice of the
nivel
people with
nacional,
disabilities
sobre todo a
at
nivel
an
global,
international level,
a través de sus organizaciones
through
miembros,
these member
tanto
organizations,
IADI, de IDA, con el apoyo del Fondo de
IDA
Población de Naciones Unidas, UNFPA,
with the
se
support
ofreció este curso en línea.
of
Y tras una evaluación de este curso piloto, tenemos
the
consideraciones
evaluation of
muy
this pilot
importantes compartir,
period, we
como que
have
la formación
seen
en
that the
línea
formation
y las mentorías o
online and
tutorías
the
son claves
tutoring
para acompañar
are
a los
key
jóvenes
for
en espacios virtuales, ahora en donde se
giving
discuten
space of the
a
young
nivel
people
global,
in
regional,
cultural
nacional o
person
local,
at a
los derechos de las
regional,
personas con
local, or state
discapacidad.
level,
Pero también
but
son
also
necesarias
it is
herramientas accesibles específicas
needed
para asegurar su
the
participación.
specific ways of their
Otro
participation.
punto importante es el de
Very important
transversalizar el movimiento de
is
discapacidad en
to
redes amplias y
transversalize
temáticas de jóvenes y por tanto la inclusión de los derechos de los jóvenes con discapacidad en todas las redes globales
in all of
de
the
jóvenes,
international
como las redes
networks
regionales y
after
nacionales es clave.
and in all of the level, their
Y nos
participation
hemos
is
comprometido con
key
todos nuestros
participation.
socios a
And we
nivel
say to
global,
all of
regional
our
y local en
partners
asegurar
at
el
all levels
fortalecimiento de
for
estos liderazgos y
providing
formular propuestas de
help
acompañamiento y la promoción de la Convención
with
de
promoting
Naciones Unidas
of
sobre
this
los Derechos de
convention
las
of
Personas
the
con
national
Discapacidad.
of this convention of
Es importante que los grupos de jóvenes con
very
discapacidad
important
sean
that
incluidos en el
youth with
movimiento
disabilities
global,
have
expresen y expongan su participación en diferentes foros.
that these
Este
people
es el
express
elemento de una
themselves in different
participación
media.
efectiva y significativa de los
Their
jóvenes con
participation
discapacidad
is very
en este
effective and
foro
very
de juventud de
meaningful,
ECOSOC con el apoyo del gobierno de Finlandia.
as this happened with
Y
the
que por primera
help
vez
of the
se
government
realiza
of
un
Finland.
evento
And
paralelo
for the
que
first time,
permite intercambiar
this side event
experiencias,
permits
escuchar
us
las voces de
change
los
the
propios
perspective and
jóvenes con
hear the
discapacidad.
voice of these people with young people with disabilities, of youth with
Deseo poner
disabilities.
énfasis también
I
en la
want to make an
importancia
accent
de
also
resaltar
to the
cómo las diferentes
importance
identidades
of the different
modelan las
entities
experiencias
which can
de los
model the
jóvenes,
experiences
lo
of
cual
youth with
visibiliza la
disabilities,
interseccionalidad que viven las personas con
which make
discapacidad.
visible the intersectionalities of these people with
Tomando en cuenta el género, los contextos de
with
pobreza extrema, los grupos indígenas,
disabilities,
las
which
personas
also makes
afrodescendientes,
visible all
las
other
discapacidades
groups
subrepresentadas, todos estos
which
ejes
are not
de la
represented
transversalidad
and which are present in our
implican su
community
vulnerabilidad en contextos de movilidad
in
humana
the
forzada.
context of human
Sus
mobility.
voces jóvenes deben
Their
ser
young
escuchadas
voices
y
should be
llevadas
heard,
a foros políticos para que se tomen
integrated in
decisiones
the
importantes
political forums
conforme
so they can
a
be
sus
taken into
derechos a
consideration
través de
through
su participación.
through their
Desde el segundo
participation.
semestre del año pasado, IDA creó una lista de correos
IDA created a newsletter
en la cual
list
se intercambian diferentes tipos de información
where we can
sobre
exchange
eventos,
different
sobre
types of
pasantías, oportunidades de
information,
becas,
of
y
opportunities,
oportunidades de
of
trabajo, así
scholarships,
como la
opportunities
participación en
of work,
diferentes
and
eventos,
participation in different
como la
events,
Conferencia de Estados Partes, el
as
Foro
are the
Político de Alto Nivel, de
conferences,
Desarrollo
political
Sostenible,
forums,
la condición,
different
la
meetings,
Comisión de la Condición Jurídica y Social de la Mujer, entre otros,
the
y
state
aspiramos que a
of
través del
the
liderazgo de
woman,
IDA podamos seguir abriendo
among others,
más
where we
espacios
hope that
de
we
participación,
will be
diálogo
able
y
to open
construcción
the
conjunta.
dialogue and the participation of these groups.
Se estima que existen entre
It is
180 y
estimated that
220
there are
millones de jóvenes con discapacidad en todo el
180
mundo.
and 220 million of people with
Más
disabilities
del
around the world,
80% vive en países de desarrollo.
with over 80% living in developing countries.
Desde IDA es nuestro compromiso
From IDA,
seguir
it is
fortaleciendo y construyendo capacidades en
our
ustedes,
objective
nuestros
to
jóvenes, para que su
put
esencia,
our
su
capacities in
frescura,
these young
pasión,
people
compromiso
so
y
that
valentía nutran
their
nuestras raíces en
their
el
work
movimiento global,
nurtures
en el
our
movimiento regional y en el movimiento
work
nacional, en nuestra
in
lucha colectiva
national
por
and
los derechos de las
international
personas con
movements
discapacidad.
and our
Que nada sea
initiative.
sobre los jóvenes sin los jóvenes. Y para terminar, quiero felicitar
Finish, I want to
todos los
congratulate
jóvenes
to
que están
all
uniendo
of
sus voces,
the young
experiencias
people
y
who are
voces en esta
giving their
mañana en este evento paralelo.
effort for in
Transformemos
this
juntos este
side
mundo que
event.
tenemos. No hay tiempo que perder. Muchísimas gracias.
There is no time to waste. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for those words and for your leadership and commitment to mainstreaming the disability agenda, especially within the broader youth movement. I now have the pleasure to invite a few fellow youth speakers to share their perspective. First off is Ramisha Ijaz, a friend and colleague who has been closely involved in organizing the Consultation of Youth with Disabilities in November last year, followed by the side event at COSP. Ramisha is a university student and a person with a psychosocial disability. She has been involved in the development sector since the past 7 years and has worked in social welfare, education, financial inclusion, women rights, and disability rights. She also provides self-development and youth development trainings. More recently, she has been a strong advocate for disability rights, specifically disability rights for persons with psychosocial disabilities, besides being affiliated with TCI Asia. Very recently, she launched a DPO to exclusively work for the rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities in Pakistan and provides alternatives to therapy. Ramisha?
Thank you, Karthik, for the kind introduction. I thank all the participants and the ECOSOC Youth Forum for providing me with this opportunity. Before I delve into the discussion, I would like to share some lived experiences that I faced as a young woman with an invisible disability. In school, I was famous for being the mad girl. Years of bullying and lack of acceptance forced me to isolate myself further. As a victim of violence, the trauma was so embedded in me that I started to have episodes of screaming and self-harm. Eventually, I was taken to a hospital, and the treatment given to apparently correct my mind was electric shocks. Things got worse when I entered university and I was asked to withdraw in my 4th semester because my state of mind was not appropriate enough to continue with my education.
Sorry, it's the interpreter speaking. Can you please slow down?
Sure.
Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry. To frame it simply, I was always asked, "What is wrong with you?" and I could never fathom the answer. Something was definitely wrong, but the problem was never with me. The problem was with the society, the lack of inclusiveness and acceptability. We, young people with disabilities, belong to one of the most marginalized communities. We're often denied the most basic rights, including the right to education, the right to equal participation, and even the right to life. On 23rd of November 2020, the UN Youth Envoy's Office, in a collaboration with other parties, organized a global consultation for youth with disabilities. It was the first time so many talented young people from across the globe came together to discuss what we need. Before the consultation, a survey was circulated to ask about the prominent themes youth with disabilities would like to discuss. Consequently, the four most pertinent themes discussed at the consultation pertain to inclusive participation, disability rights as human rights, intersectionality, and partnerships with non-disability groups. Following the consultation, the main demand of young people with disabilities was to provide them with a platform, a network where young people with disabilities can come together and amplify their voices. We also demanded a space at the CRPD and COSP events to address our needs presented from within the wider disability movement, the recognition of the right to technology as a human right, decision-making, and political participation opportunities for youth with disabilities. These demands were all presented at the COSP side event in December. COVID-19 and lockdown measures across the world have widened the gap for marginalized youth with disabilities. We all agree that youth with disabilities demand inclusiveness and accessibility, but it has taken 9 years for youth with disabilities to have a dedicated side event at the ECOSOC Youth Forum. Promises of inclusivity and inclusive participation must be fulfilled for all youth with disabilities, especially those living within the margins of society. We need a dedicated space for us to come together. And we need institutional parties to not only recognize, but also to provide us a space to express our needs and our concerns as not only youth with disabilities, but as the young leaders of tomorrow. Such platforms must continue, and we hope that institutional parties and the UN agencies will everywhere and always allow for voices of young people with disabilities to be heard and to fulfill the promise of leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ramisha. And again, having sort of worked with you in this process, I couldn't agree more, especially the fact that it has taken us so many years, as you rightly put, to get this side event at the ECOSOC Youth Forum. I sincerely hope that this is going to continue. This is the first of many events. And I'm also looking to all of the agency representatives here to really try and to really ensure that they work with us to ensure that going forward, our voices are well representative. And this is beyond just tokenistic participation. It is also, of course, great to expand the work that we've done back in November and December to hear from other youth from around the world as well as part of this side event. So really excited about that. Thank you so much again for sharing your perspectives. Next up is Kato. Kato Mark is from Uganda, aged 23 years, and a youth with deaf blindness. He is an IDA WFDB fellow researching on employment of deafblind youth in marginalized communities in Uganda. Kato, we would love to hear your thoughts, particularly on COVID-19 and marginalized communities.
Particulièrement pour le COVID-19.
Floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Sorry, the network has been disturbing us, but all the same, I'm here. Again, I apologize for the delay. The network is bad. All the same, I'm here. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I'm happy to be here. My name is Kato Mark from Uganda. I'm deaf blind and a youth. I belong to IDA, World Federation of the Deaf Blind Fellowship. I want to share the influence of COVID and how we have been able to overcome them as a person with deaf blindness in Uganda. First of all, I'll begin with the SCOPs. That is social distancing. For us deaf-blind persons, it has not been easy because we use tactile communication mode of, we use a mode of communication called tactile. Secondly, the masks are also a challenge because a deaf-blind person, if you close yourself, you feel the breathing is not all that well. And even the mask will cover your face. It is a bit challenging. Thirdly, washing hands every time because of the standards of COVID. it is also a challenge to us as persons with deaf blindness. And most of us could not even locate where the places of washing, the places are. Then in Uganda, when Uganda announced closure, lockdown, they closed all the travels, all public places. So we as persons with deaf blindness, we didn't know what was happening. We just they moved us into the house and we thought it was like a punishment to stay home because we cannot access radios. TVs are sometimes also difficult unless you get near to it. If the TV is at a distance, you cannot get the information or learn from it. So it has been a challenge to get information. So now we have not been having enough access to information on COVID-19. We don't know what is happening with the COVID and which virus, how they are testing it. So they kept on announcing on the radios, on the TVs, but it was difficult for us to get information because COVID-19 has standards. You must have a social distance from each other. Now, if I'm a distance from the person who is next to me, I will not be able to communicate in tactile sign language. You have to move with the sanitizer always. So there were many things to learn as persons who don't see, who don't hear. We had to learn how to use sanitizers. The fourth thing is on feeding. The families of deaf-blind people, the parents give or sometimes want to give all their best, but they don't know how to communicate. The relationship sometimes is not there, is a little bit low. So deaf-blind people decide to give you anything, anytime they want. So it has been easy to access everything in life. Parents who used to support us, they were also stuck at home. They were not moving out to look for resources. The fifth point is on communication. Communication was a very big problem. And we have to use tactile sign language. So when COVID came, deaf-blind people didn't know what had happened because they could not access information through the eyes, through the ears. When you get an interpreter, the interpreter must use, first of all, learn what is going to communicate to you and then give it to you through tactile. So when COVID came up, we were left home stuck. They could not communicate because the tactile sign language interpreters were few and family members did not know the language. So we stayed home stuck as if we were in prison. Communication was a big challenge. First of all, the parents, relatives, it was hard to access anything, even from neighbors. In the neighborhood, we could not reach there to access resources. Deaf-blind people, if we focus on the youth, what happened, how it has affected COVID-19, how it has affected the youth with deaf blindness, via social distancing, accessing information. So these things have made it caused for us a big challenge. Deaf-blind people, when they want to act, to do anything, or they have to use tactile sign language. That is, you have to wash your hands, you have to do social distancing. If you do social distancing, then immobility is very difficult. You cannot move. You know, we move by touching the hand. So it is even easy if you are alone as a deafblind person to be grabbed off, to be raped off, to be killed, because whenever you go, you have to pay for something like a boda. You have to pay for somebody to take you around. Anything you have to pay for it. And many people, when they see you, they think you are lying. You are maybe getting into relationship with your guide because you are moving very close. Very true, youth with the deaf blindness, we have suffered during this time for COVID-19. But we have to continue. I have to be brief. We expected a lot to learn from COVID-19 as youth with deaf blindness. So if they are to add on information, we are waiting and we are eagerly waiting for the information. So thank you very much. A nice time, a nice meeting. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you so much, Kato. A lot of the practical difficulties that you shared, I could totally relate to them as a blind individual myself, especially the social distancing and how we rely a lot on touch, which is not possible anymore. And the other thing that really resonated with me was this lack of information in an accessible format. Everyone had access to information about COVID-19, what the government was doing, but it is hard to imagine that most of that information was inaccessible for people with disabilities, a lot of disabilities. And so that is indeed very unfortunate, but also sort of a wake-up call that we really need to take this seriously and make sure that access to information, when we talk about equitable access, includes people with disabilities that are often forgotten when we think about information accessibility. I now have the pleasure of inviting Poliana da Silva, who will talk about a very crucial but overlooked aspect of disability and intersectionality. Poliana is a Black autistic LGBT woman, activist of the Black movement of Brazil and the Disabled Peoples Movement, academic of bioprocess and biotechnology engineering at UFPR. The floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I would like to say that it's an honor to be present at the 10th Economic and Social Council Youth Forum. And I would also like to thank IDA for the invitation. Listening to young people, especially young people with disabilities, who are usually underrepresented, is essential to establish a fair, inclusive, and unprejudiced world. My name is Poliana Sa. I'm 20 years old. I'm a Black autistic LGBT woman, activist of the Black movement and the disability rights movement at the Black Disabled Lives Matter Brazil, and member of Abraça, the Brazilian Association of Action for the Right of Autistic People. I am Brazilian, and I appreciate the opportunity to share my experiences as a Black disabled woman in my country, especially in a period of global pandemic. Brazil is structurally racist, ableist, and misogynist. The direct consequences of almost 400 years of slavery, the several years of silencing for people with disability, women, and native population are still present incisively in our society. According to data from the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, currently my nation is composed mostly of Black people and women. Beyond that, more than 12 million of Brazilians declare to have some kind of disability. Besides, approximately 810,000 of Brazilians self-declare indigenous. The normatization of the violence against our bodies and our lives has become something common and institutionalized. A significant portion of these groups are in a situation of social or economic vulnerability. We are ignored by the state, which is exempt from its responsibility to establish public policies to support us, to support young people with disabilities. Here, the first person to die of COVID-19 was a Black woman who worked as a maid. As recently said Cacique Roane, one of the most influential indigenous leaders in Brazil, the Federation used the pandemic as a way to exterminate the native population. Being a person who lives the intersectionality of being a Black disabled woman is synonymous to resistance. In my country, there is a photogenic structure that does not like people like us to exist. At every moment, there are attempts to silence us, to mark us, and to persecute us. During the COVID-19 pandemic, our federal government acted with a genuine genocidal plan to contain and remedy the virus. The absence of a crisis committee, the delay in purchasing vaccines, and the disregard for the lethality of the disease were some of the many postures presented that caused the death of more than 330,000 Brazilians in a period of just over 1 year, with a moving average of almost 3,000 deaths per day. In this context, people with disability, women, Black people, and also indigenous people who are usually at risky situation was the most affected. We face great difficulties in having access to services and support for people with disabilities, to have access to the essential services, and to have access to the vaccine itself. Sanitary policies to prevent the virus do not raise slaves. They do not raise women who are in situation of domestic violence. They do not include people with disabilities. They take no notice of indigenous villages. We are seeing our rights being violated. Nevertheless, in the last decade, we have seen an increase in refugees from countries such as Haiti, Colombia, Venezuela, who have had to carry out forced migrations due to natural disaster or political crisis. Brazil, as many other nations, has failed to create inclusion itself and inclusive policies for those people. During the pandemic, this has been not differently. Mostly, there is no measure to include this group in the vaccination plans against COVID-19. We must be aware that attitudes like this are completely inhumane in addition to directly contributing to the increase in the rate of transmission of the virus. Refugees have as much right to be vaccinated as any other. We have the duty to protect all those who are so easily affected. In this way, I strongly urge other states to take a closer look at people like us, to highlight young political leaders, to have a responsible attitude toward their populations, and help us to repudiate any and all exclusionary policies against socially vulnerable groups. We need to create we need to create intervention strategies that will be able to protect all those people. A long time ago, a man said that the world is spherical, and because of that, everything we do affects all the others. That is why we need to treat this health crisis as a collective problem. It is necessary to assist those who cannot afford the vaccines, postulate those who are failing and establish a satisfactory sanitary containment structure, and primarily act together against the virus. We, young people with disabilities, are the key to change the mindset of people, to create transformation. May we have the posture of demanding measures from our governments, pointing out the problems that exist in our nations and making our voices to be heard and echoed to all the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pollyanna, for that very powerful intervention. And thank you also for stressing the holistic approach we need to take, really taking into account, other identities as well with disability and how complex this can be, but really to be mindful of that as we think about this agenda and mainstreaming youth with disabilities. Next, we have our friend, Mariana Camacho, who is a youth representative from UNFPA. Mariana has previously attended the ECOSOC Youth Forum, and so I'd love for you to reflect on your experience then, but also talk about intersectionality and your perspective on that yourself. Go for it.
Thank you very much for all the people who organize these side events. I would like to share a little bit of my experience. I apologize if I cannot speak English very well. During a professional my presentation is Let's Become Advocates. During my professional practice, as a person told me, you need to know more about disability. It's not enough to be a woman with disability to defend your rights. Over time, I listened to the experiences of other people with disabilities.
I was not alone because I faced the same barriers for inequality. Education is the basis for improving your participation in various fields nationwide. However, your life experience and engagement with organizations of people with disabilities or other activists is what really helps you to grow professional and personally. I must thank, can you pass it? Thank you. I must thank the movement We Are All in Action Meta, who opened me the door to my first international experience in Uruguay, where I understood the meaning of inclusive development. Young people with and without disabilities have difficulties in accessing education and employment opportunities. Usually, our voices are constantly silent. 2 years later, I dream became true for anyone passionate about human rights. I was a panelist in the Civil Society Forum during the 10th session of the United Nations Conference of State Parties at New York in the UN headquarters in New York. I wanted to be in the sixth conference room at the same time to participate in all the side events. A year before, a group of women with disabilities trust me to be a founding partner of the Latin American Alliance of Women with Disabilities. As a member of the board of directors, I was able to participate in the consultation process of the National Institute of Women and follow up the Montevideo Consensus on Population and Development for the elaboration of of the first national report with several feminists and LGBTQI women who advocate for the sexual and reproductive health and rights. This process was carried out with the support of UNPA Costa Rica. Can you? Thank you. In the first working session, I showed my concern because this regional instrument related to population priorities did not have a specific chapter on disability. This statement became a personal commitment to present with my colleagues the gaps and challenges that women with disabilities enter in each of the chapters written already. I don't want to deceive you. I don't have an idea of the International Conference of Population and Development in Cairo in 1994 or the Regional Consensus of Population and Development in Montevideo of 2014. I still have difficulty understanding the technical aspects related to the follow-up indicators as some of the understanding, sorry, as some of the women involved in the process who don't have disabilities as well. During the working sessions, I was able to better understand it means to be an activist. The difference in judgment and criteria were there, but what matters is to find the meeting points during the advocacy process. The barriers and limitations related to my participation were many. I did not always have the financial resources to travel to the meeting points or facilitates were not accessible for a woman in a wheelchair. Despite I counted on many people because we respect each other. And when anyone has the floor, we shut her voice, not only for their ideals, but for the ones I stand by as well. A new opportunity came when I returned to the United Nations at the ECOSOC Youth Forum in 2019 to discuss challenges for the implementation of the CDGs related to inclusive education, inequality gaps, decent employment and work, and the generation of strategic partnerships. I was reviewing my report while I was preparing this presentation. I suddenly recognized that young people around the world fight against the same challenges. Even their advances related to the use of technological tools have reduced geographic limits. People with disabilities around the world don't have access to basic services and internet connectivity. There were there are, sorry, thousands of virtual platforms for learning where reasonable adjustments such as captioning or sign language are not applied, but we have the right to access information. In my childhood, I had the opportunity to learn English that allows me to understand and participate in international spaces. During Nairobi Summit on ICPD 25, many young people from Latin America were limited to dialogue with others. However, I had a few minutes to share the experiences of several women with disabilities who were victims of domestic and structural property violence, because ableism remains in our society. There is a perception that women with disabilities are beings unable to make decisions by ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your work, but also highlighting a couple of things that I found particularly, I think, important that we should discuss and think about. One of the things talking about how barriers such as language and accessibility can often prevent, a lot of young people with disabilities to participate in forums like these. We are fortunate, that our voices can be heard today, but such is not the case for a lot of our other fellow young people with disabilities. And hence the platform that Ramisha was talking about before, to really try and figure out how we can ensure that we can basically democratize access and ensure that everyone can participate in meetings like these and can have their voices heard. So very, very important. Thank you for highlighting that, but also sharing your experiences at the past ECOSOC Youth Forum and other events. Thanks so much for your work. And then our last youth speaker, but certainly not the least, we have Curtis John Sue. Curtis brings the unique perspective of Special Olympics, of being a Special Olympics athlete, and we would love to hear from you about diversity, inclusion, and intersectionality in sports, something that is not touched all that often. So the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm Curtis Sue, and a Special Olympics athlete and an athlete leader from Hong Kong. I am the Special Olympics Sergeant Shriver International Global Messenger, and try my best to speak for a person with intellectual disabilities. As a young person with autism, I've experienced difficulties in the past. I have low fitness level, lacked confidence, and my self-esteem was low. When I participated in Special Olympics, my first impression about this movement is sports. As I grew older, I realized Special Olympics is more than sports. It can develop different talents at different stage. I participated in athlete leadership training, in speaking, coaching, and cooperating with other people. For example, I volunteered at and finally a graphic designer. Now I'm here as a global ambassador to speak to all of you for Special Olympics. Looking back in 2020, from my point of view, COVID-19 affects the life of everyone in the world for those who have disabilities. Firstly, every region have different degrees of lockdown. No matter what level of lockdown it is, young people with disabilities, especially young people with intellectual disabilities, have to adjust the new normal, like reduce in-person physical activities and sports training as a one big switch. For example, they have to get used to digital platform in every training and participation. This affects the participation of the persons with intellectual disabilities, and because it is difficult for them to concentrate on using online devices for a long time. In addition, some of them don't have or don't know how to access online or don't have a digital devices at home. It also affects their social and interaction with others, which may affect the emotions of person with the intellectual disabilities. Secondly, the inclusive education is hard to make progress. In many countries and areas, general educational schools and special educational schools separates. Even schools provide in-person and online together to support people with intellectual disabilities. Missing in-person interaction can cause the loss of educational opportunity on inclusion, both young people with and without disabilities. It can be a result of information and technology inaccessibility, as well as lack of caring from people without disability. Thirdly, employment rate for young people with intellectual disabilities has been very low. The pandemic made even worse. Lots of companies reduce headcounts or even close facilities. Except training and participation, some of them have become employed, especially people with intellectual disabilities. Even except training sports, they can't, even they have a job, they don't feel included because the job assigned for intellectual disabilities are simple, without any support from others without intellectual disability. Lack of training, sports, job plays, different kinds of talents may have difficult in job transition or role transition on every leadership perspective. Fourthly, as a Special Olympics athlete and a health messenger, I'm really concerned about the health and fitness of young people with intellectual disabilities. There could be more sports training and competition opportunities for us, people with intellectual disability. But I'm worried how we can regain these opportunities after COVID-19, when economy and safety need time to recover. Lastly, I think many people with disabilities are ready to lead. However, compared to people with visible disabilities, young people with intellectual disabilities are even more marginalized and underestimated because people think we're not capable of leading. In fact, some of us can communicate and well receive information through various channels. Many are already well equipped. In light of those challenges, I would like to share my view on what we could do to cope with them. In Special Olympics, various communicate with our internal and external audiences on a regular basis. We share stories of people with intellectual disabilities all over the world to know more about the organization. And we use sports as a core to reach people without intellectual disability. We educate people on inclusive education, inclusive health, unified leadership, and along with many programs and projects, create meaningful leadership roles to young people with intellectual disabilities. Our youth leaders with and without intellectual disabilities collaboratively provided different lectures and launched social media campaigns for young people in order to keep active and connected, such as Inclusion Band, 1,000 Crane for Inclusion, Shaping Our Inclusive Future Together, Fit5 Fitness program, etc. We extend our sports program to more than sports in order to promote inclusion to the wider community. This is what we have been doing on our end. On the other hand, United Nations, the member states, and all organizations for people with disabilities could provide more support and education for people with intellectual disabilities during the different kinds of crises, as well as raising public awareness of their situation. Also, the United Nations can organize online unified workshops and forums like this side event to support young people with intellectual disabilities. We are more than capable of speaking for ourselves. We can help with decision making and as well as designing practical plans. We just need more opportunities and support from those without intellectual disabilities. Let us guide them to work with us appropriately to build inclusive society together. At last, young people with other disabilities, even through we have different types of disabilities, we have abilities, but our first identity is a person. We are a young person. We should have a say on everything that matters to us, and we should be welcomed on every table. I hope we can use our respective strength to collaborate and to be a game changer. Let us lead. All we need a chance and your support. Thank you and merci.
Thank you so much, Curtis. Several very, very important points that you raised that I'd like to highlight. One, of course, really using sport as a way to bridge this gap between people with and without disabilities, really thinking about emotional well-being and mental health, something that often gets forgotten when we think about other things like education, employment, which of course are also important areas to think about, as you mentioned. So thank you again for really sharing your perspective on this unique perspective as someone who basically uses sport to bring about awareness within people without disabilities about the abilities of people with disabilities. Thank you again. So I don't know about all of you, but these views from our youth speakers have been very, very enriching for me. A lot of very interesting, important points that were raised, right from inclusive participation, making sure that we really have a voice at every table and we are a part of decision-making processes at the UN and beyond. Lack of information, which is something that we need to take seriously, especially in the post-COVID world, as more and more things now start to go digital. Thinking about education and employment, with it being virtual and different educational pedagogies, etc. How do we ensure that those are accessible to people with disabilities? Thinking about accessibility, thinking about digital divide and how that again intersects with disability. And also, of course, again, thinking about mental health. So a lot of very important points to think about as we think about the solutions and the way forward. But shifting gears, I would now like to invite a few of our allies from UN agencies to share their perspectives and how we can work with them to ensure that youth with disabilities have a voice in all UN processes and programs, and how we can work with them to solve some of the problems that were just raised by our youth speakers. So first up, we have, I'd like to invite Ms. Leila Sharafi from UNFPA, again, a very strong and supportive ally to share her views with us on this. Ms. Sharafi is a global gender advisor and disability focal point within the technical division at UNFPA headquarters. Ms. Sharafi, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. It's such a true pleasure to be here. And I'll start off by saying how important this event is. And I really want to thank our co-organizers and all of the panelists for sharing their precious time with us during this ECOSOC Youth Forum event. In the UN, we adhere to the principle that participation is a fundamental human right. And it's one of the guiding principles in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it's been reiterated in many conventions and declarations. Through active participation, we also know that young people are empowered to play a vital role in their own development as well as their communities. But to participate effectively, as many of the previous speakers have been saying, young people really must be given the proper tools, such as information, access, education, and importantly, the ability to really have access to their civil rights. But as a whole, in the UN, we're really only beginning to scratch the surface. I'm pleased to say that last year in 2019, 2 years ago now, the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy, the UNDIS, a common plan for the UN system, was launched. Now, this certainly helps, and it gives the UN one framework to mainstream and integrate disability through all of our work, from programs to accessibility to employment of persons with disabilities in our own agencies. It's a huge and major step. This effort as well to ensure that young people with disabilities are a core part of the UN intergovernmental process is also essential. But we have a long road to travel. But youth-informed, youth-led, and youth-inspired is fully recognized by the UN system. So I must say that as a critical step to sustainable development and peace. It's there, the commitment is there. And as I said, it's in the Declaration of Human Rights as a core principle and human right. From the UN perspective, maybe I'll just talk a little bit about how we're coming to a place of making progress. Agencies, including those co-hosts today, UNICEF, WHO, UNHCR, and UNFPA, where I work, have been working on disability inclusion. I just want to highlight a couple of examples of some work that we've been doing during COVID-19. For example, during the pandemic, UNICEF, our sister agency, supported the engagement of youth with disabilities in different activities, related to disability inclusive response, from volunteering and adopting materials into accessible formats to establishing online support groups. For example, with UNICEF's support in Bulgaria, young people with disabilities created their own online content, videos, blogs, sharing their experiences, advice, and role modeling to influence peers during COVID-19 lockdown. In Guinea-Bissau, following extensive consultations with adolescents with disabilities, new designs of girl-friendly and inclusive latrines were implemented in 6 additional schools. For example, through UNFPA's work, through the We Decide program, which is a global program promoting young people and women with disabilities to not face violence, gender-based violence, and access their sexual and reproductive health and rights. In Morocco, we made sure that SRHR services continued and were provided to persons with disabilities despite the pandemic, which, as we know, has constructed a lot of additional barriers. As the ambassador said, as Ramisha and many others in this wonderful panel have said, in 2020 of November, the Office of the Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, the Permanent Mission of Finland, in collaboration with OHCHR, UNICEF, UNFPA, UNHCR, and WHO, organized a virtual global consultation with young people with disabilities. And this was really an opportunity, as many have spoke about, to bring their voices into the Conference of States Parties event that took place in December, where member states are really convening to talk about agreements and how the implementation of the CRP convention can be furthered. And I mean, I think what's really striking is that those young people told us, particularly the UN, that we need to create a dedicated space for youth with disabilities to share their perspectives and challenges and on how to work together within the broader UN system, right, as a whole. And there are 50-something UN entities, by the way. So really it's to ensure that it's across the board and to ensure that their authentic voices are represented and not to have tokenistic participation, which is actually something we hear from all young people. Irrespective, that they want to be sure that their participation is not tokenistic. They also told us that the platform that goes across the agency should really exist, but in connection with member states and other stakeholders, right? And very importantly, they said that they want to make sure that the examples that I gave and the work that we're doing are taken to scale. Because that's how we'll really ensure that we're reaching, all the populations. I want to share one more example, but it's related to COVID. So UNFPA, with Women Enabled International, our partner organization, with the support of the UN Partnership Promoting the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, UNPRPD funding, under the joint program, last year, we hosted virtual consultations with persons with disabilities, including young people with disabilities. And we really wanted to document the lived experiences of persons with disabilities during COVID. What we learned is not shocking to many of you, but it did document, and we will publish these findings, that the barriers have really deepened during the pandemic. In relation to healthcare, many resources and health policies failed to take into account gender and disability. We saw the gender-based violence skyrocket for women and girls, including women and girls with disabilities. We learned that the COVID pandemic had a disproportionate impact on persons with disabilities due to their gender and disability. We also heard that during the crisis, meeting basic needs, really, there were significant barriers to meeting basic needs of food, water, sanitation, housing, and disability-related support. Many of those things went to the wayside. We also heard about setbacks in employment and education, as other panelists have mentioned. And advocates around the world feared that the shutting down of schools and barriers to remote education and technology for students and young people with disabilities, especially those in rural areas, would really have a profound impact on an entire generation of young people with disabilities. So I'll say that, we will support advocates as the UN, and I can speak on behalf of UNFPA, my agency, including young advocates, to continue to fight for their ability to exercise what we call bodily autonomy and chart their own life course. And for UNFPA, we want to make sure that young persons with disabilities, and I can say across the UN, are heard across all the work we do, not just as it relates to disability issues. So for example, as the co-lead for the Action Coalition on Bodily Autonomy and Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights, as part of the Generation Equality Forum, which is a commemoration of the Beijing 25 Platform for Action, UNFPA and other partners have been advocating that the coalition's work, which is going to be a 5-year work plan, and its core priorities of comprehensive sexuality education, SRH services, and addressing gender norms keep young persons with disabilities at the center. And finally, I'll just start to close by saying the pandemic has really magnified the inequalities of the past and today. But as the ambassador and many others have said, it also gives us a chance to build a better future together. So this is an important moment, and this conversation comes at a very timely moment. But all young people have a right to be heard. And I want to close with a quote from a young woman with a disability from Bosnia and Herzegovina, a 22-year-old woman who participated in the consultation that many of us have spoke about now last November. And she says, I constantly meet young people with disabilities who are unaware of not only their human rights, but also their right to participate. Youth with disabilities have a right to be heard, and we as a society have an obligation to inform use of these rights. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much for sharing your views, and as well as we're really excited about the commitment of UNFPA as well as the broader UN system, and as you rightly said, to not only ensure that there is youth with disabilities participation on disability issues, but on all issues. So thank you again for your partnership. Thank you again for this commitment, and we really look forward to continue to work with you to ensure that we can actually make this happen and ensure that we can get all of those voices heard, in everything that we do, everything that the UN does as well. Next up, it is now my pleasure and honor to invite Mr. Werner Oppenmeier, Director of the World Health Organization Office at UN Headquarters in New York, to share his views on this. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kartik. As you have said earlier, in the World Health Organization, you not only have a partner, but a friend in this common endeavor. In the UN system, when people say I'll be brief, they end up speaking 20 to 30 minutes, but I am really going to be brief today and say, starting off with, as a public health agency, it's very important for WHO to be part of this discussion and to explore with everyone who are participating how they can be part of the pandemic recovery. We know youth with disabilities commonly experience increased risks during pandemics, risk in contracting COVID or its severe symptoms, complications from the disease, and they often have poorer health during and after the outbreak. Youth with disabilities are at higher risk, mainly due to environmental barriers that limit effective protection against the virus. And these barriers obviously include things like lack of timely and accessible public health information, lack of accommodation necessary to facilitate basic health actions such as frequent hand washing and maintaining physical distance. Young people with underlying health conditions associated with higher levels of disability have an increased risk of developing severe symptoms from COVID. There is a recent report from the United Kingdom which actually shows substantially higher risk faced by young people with learning difficulties. They are 70% more likely to die from COVID than people without such impairment. The disruptions to education, as several people have mentioned, and economic uncertainty and the lack or loss of employment have had a fundamental impact on the physical and mental health of young people. Our studies in WHO show that increased anxiety related to COVID-19 has been identified in almost 90% of young people. Many adolescents and young people with disabilities who are unable to attend school or university and are separated from their peers have experienced worry, hopelessness, isolation, loneliness, anger, and frustration. It is now actually more than ever needed that youth should be seen, heard, and engaged by decision makers worldwide. And so in terms of engaging with decision makers, WHO, through our office in New York and elsewhere, work very closely within the UN system to better position health-related issues, including those concerning young people, in the debates and decisions of the UN system, such as ECOSOC and all its subsidiary bodies, and also the General Assembly. The UN system has an enhanced role for young people in implementation of the SDGs and other frameworks such as the Addis Ababa Action Agenda and the World Programme on Action for Youth, which all provide policy frameworks and practical guidelines for national action and international support to support and improve the lives of young people around the world. I think the ECOSOC Youth Forum and the Commission on Social Development are two examples that can play a significant role to implement these reinforcing agendas. In WHO, we have also been working quite progressively towards meeting the urgent needs for new solutions and innovative approaches to support young people and highlight the critical role of their leadership, and particularly those persons with disabilities, and how they can engage with their communities to counter the effects of the pandemic. One example to close with is our work on the Global Youth Mobilization Initiative that WHO and the world's largest youth organizations representing 250 million people launched recently. This initiative is open for everybody, and it will engage not only youth organizations, but also UN agencies, high-profile global partners, and other influencers. So I think in conclusion, I want to encourage all of you to participate. And this meeting today has been really a fantastic opportunity for me personally and my colleagues in WHO to learn from all your views that you have expressed and to be guided in our work going forward to be better advocates and to support your agenda. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much again for those words. Really appreciate your partnership, your support. It has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. And we look forward again to continue to work with you and others to see how we can
Somos muy felices de poder trabajar en futuro.
As well, and can reach out to more people as well. I would now like to open this up to questions. If you have any, you can post your questions in chat, and I would request Kami to recognize any questions if there are any and help me out here.
Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Karthik. We are monitoring the chat box and we don't have any questions. I can imagine that because we are running over time. I think at best, I will say that we will be sharing the recording, and if there are any questions that participants want to follow up with, we are open. We will drop the email address in the chat box. So over to you, Karthik, to close. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, yeah, in the interest of time, we'll now move to the conclusion, as Kami said, but we'd love to hear from, especially youth without disabilities as well. We really cannot do this without you. We need you as allies. Would love to hear more perspectives and experiences from youth with disabilities who've tuned in as well. And in case there are any other member states and agencies, we'd love to have you on board. Please help us, please support us in this agenda. We'd love to work with you and see how we can scale, and include more people. So we're really looking to you for your support and collaboration in this agenda. So again, some of the things that came up that speakers brought up, again, to just reinforce, Inclusive participation, really important. Really thinking about how we can scale this, how we can ensure that it's not just me, talking to you and the youth speakers, but how can we ensure that there's diversity? How can we ensure that there are people really from the most underrepresented people that we can hear from, their perspectives, their challenges, to ensure that we really are solving the problems that people are facing around the world, especially young people with disabilities, ensuring that how young people with disabilities can be a part of other thematic areas and issues as well, really mainstreaming that. And then also, of course, really thinking about very critically other issues that were brought up, especially a lot of them coming to forefront and becoming more important because of COVID-19, but that require our immediate attention as we think about post-COVID world and the new normal, as we call it. Things like lack of information. How do we make sure that everything is accessible? UNDIS, of course, is a great step. Really looking forward to seeing the UN information systems and information in general, all of the meetings becoming accessible, so that people with disabilities do not have the practical difficulties that would help them to participate in these meetings and ensure that their voice is heard. Really, of course, looking at other thematic areas like education and employment. How is it that we need to, really reimagine some of these things, especially as they go virtual, and there are new ways in which we are thinking about these things. Thinking about digital divide, thinking about mental health. So a lot of issues here that were brought up that we really need to think and work collectively on to ensure that we can go and solve for these problems. So again, thank you everyone. Speakers, all of the youth who've joined in. In particular, I'd like to thank the organizers, IDA, UNFPA, OHCHR, UNHCR, UNICEF, WHO, Permanent Mission of Finland, and the Secretary General's Youth Envoy's Office for their support for this event, for really helping us, really providing us a platform to come together. And I would also like to thank, of course, all of the interpreters and everyone else involved in the organization of the event. We couldn't have done it without you. And thank you again for providing us, youth with disabilities, this platform to share our perspectives with you. And we really, again, look forward to working with you in the future. With that, I would conclude the session and the meeting. Thank you again for your presence.